from Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The shock doctrine is about three different kinds of shock. The first shock is the shock of the disaster, the shock inflicted to entire countries and cities. The second shock is economic shock therapy, the shocks inflicted to economies. And the third form of shock is the shock that comes along to enforce those policies. It's the shock of torture.
Today, Naomi Klein on the shock doctrine, the rise of disaster capitalism. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Bush is expected to nominate retired federal judge Michael Mukasey to be the nation's next attorney general. Mukasey served as the chief judge of the U.S. District Court in Manhattan for 6 years and oversaw the trial of Sheikh Omar Abdulrahman and the first World Trade Center bombers. He's been a vocal supporter of the USA Patriot Act and recently said the judicial system is not well suited to handling terror trials. But Mukasey has also challenged some of President Bush's war powers. In the case of Jose Padilla, he ruled President Bush could hold Padilla as an enemy combatant without charge, but he ruled the government must allow Padilla to see his attorneys. Mukasey is close friends with Rudy Giuliani. Both Mukasey and his son are advisors to Giuliani's presidential campaign. In 1994, Mukasey swore Giuliani in as New York mayor. The private ceremony took place at Mukasey's apartment. The French foreign minister has said the world needs to prepare for the possibility of war against Iran. In an interview, Bernard Kouchner said, quote, "We have to prepare for the worst, and the worst is war." Kouchner said the standoff over Iran's nuclear program is the greatest crisis facing the world. On Sunday, Defense Secretary Robert Gates said all options are on the table when it comes to Iran. The former head of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, has admitted the war in Iraq was over oil. In his new memoir, Greenspan writes, quote, "I am saddened that it is politically inconvenient to acknowledge what everyone knows. The Iraq war is largely about oil," he said. Greenspan headed the Federal Reserve from 1987 to 2006. In his memoir, Greenspan is also highly critical of President Bush's economic policies. In Washington, D.C., tens of thousands of peace activists marched from the White House to the Capitol on Saturday to protest the war in Iraq. Police arrested around 190 protesters after they took part in a die-in in front of the Capitol. The arrests occurred when protesters started climbing over a barricade at the foot of the steps to the Capitol. Police sprayed at least 2 people with chemicals. Estimates of the size of the crowd estimated from 20,000 to 100,000. Student protester Jacob Berger said he traveled to Washington from New York, where he attends Columbia University.
The large problem today is apathy. Most people feel like they can't make a change in this world, and they just feel like it's too big. And we're here to prove that we can change. You know, we need to get that sort of rallying together like people did back in Vietnam, and that's what got us out of Vietnam, and that's what we were trying to do to get out of Iraq.
Clint Coleman was part of a contingent of protesters from the Gulf Coast region.
I came up from New Orleans, Louisiana, just to help support the fact that we still need more funds down there for Katrina. We're still suffering down there in New Orleans. And also, I'm a big supporter of getting out of Iraq also, so I thought it would be a great time to come up here and voice my concerns.
A counter-demonstration was also held by supporters of the war. One prominent peace activist, Carlos Arredondo, was beaten by pro-war activists. Arredondo's son, Alex, died in Iraq 3 years ago. To honor Alex's memory, Carlos has been crisscrossing the country, pulling a flag-draped coffin. He marched with the coffin on Saturday, then left the march to return the coffin to his truck. That's when a pro-war supporter tried to rip a photo of Carlos's son from the coffin. When Carlos tried to save the photograph, he said a group of pro-war activists attacked him.
I was assaulted by a group of pro-war people. They come into the ground and they kick me and punch me. As a citizen of this country, it's my duty and my responsibility to participate. As a father who I lost my son in Iraq, I got to honor my son.
In Louisiana, a state appeals court has overturned the conviction of 17-year-old Michael Bell, one of the Gina Six, but he remains behind bars. Last year, Bell and 5 other African-American high school students were arrested for beating a white student during a schoolyard fight. The fight occurred after white students hung 3 nooses in a tree in the schoolyard. An all-white jury convicted Bell of aggravated second-degree battery, but on Friday, a Louisiana appeals court ruled Bell should not have been tried as an adult. Bell has been in jail since December and remains locked up after Friday's ruling. We reached Michael Bell's father, Marcus Jones, on Sunday.
Now we feel like that, that's a chance of Michael getting out. We just doing, just playing it by ear as the lawyers tell us, what take place with Michael.
Prosecutors now have the option of trying Michael Bell for attempted murder as an adult or aggravated battery as a juvenile. Bell's 5 classmates are still awaiting trial. Civil rights groups say they plan to proceed with a major march on Gina on Thursday, the day Bell was originally scheduled to be sentenced. In news in Iraq, Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's government has been dealt another setback. 30 Shiite parliament members loyal to Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr are leaving Maliki's ruling coalition. Defense Secretary Robert Gates has said U.S. troops will likely remain in Iraq for what he called a protracted period. Gates also backed down on his previous statement that the United States might be able to reduce the size of its force in Iraq to 100,000 by the end of next year. On Friday, President Bush visited the Quantico Marine Base in Virginia to continue selling his Iraq strategy.
I also made it clear that now's a chance for us to come together as a nation. That some of us who believe security was paramount, we're on opposite sides of a debate where people say we just simply need to bring our troops home. Well, now we've got security in the right direction, and we are bringing our troops home.
In Germany, anti-war protesters gathered in Berlin Saturday to demand the pullout of German troops from Afghanistan. The protest comes ahead of a key parliamentary vote on Germany's role in the nearly 6-year-old war. Speakers at the protest included American peace activist Kelly Campbell of September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows.
Despite the foreign troops on the ground in Afghanistan, the security situation is getting worse. Civilians are being killed and foreign military are being killed at an increasing rate. Reconstruction is not happening. Aid organizations are pulling out. So clearly a military occupation, which we know is not working in Iraq, is also not working in Afghanistan. And it's time that we in the U.S. peace movement examine how we're going to take on these issues.
Kelly Campbell's partner's brother died in the September 11th attacks. Palestinian refugees in Lebanon are marking the 25th anniversary of the Sabra and Shatila massacre. Up to 2,000 Palestinians died September 16th and 17th, 1982, when the Israeli military allowed a Christian militia to attack the camp. Israel's then Defense Minister Ariel Sharon was forced to resign after a special Israeli investigative panel declared him to be personally responsible for the massacre. The Independent newspaper of London is reporting NATO chiefs are planning to finally tell the Serbian government where they dropped thousands of cluster bombs during the Kosovo War. Belgrade hopes this could help pinpoint thousands of unexploded munitions that have littered the country for the past 8 years. The United States, Britain, and Holland are believed to have dropped more than 2,000 cluster bombs containing 380,000 submunitions during the war. In business news, Microsoft has lost an antitrust appeal before Europe's second highest court and has been ordered to pay a record $690 million fine for abusing its dominance in computer operator systems. The court upheld a 2004 antitrust ruling from the European Commission. The European Space Agency has revealed the Arctic's Northwest Passage has opened up fully because of melting sea ice. This clears a long-sought but historically impassable route between Europe and Asia. Sea ice has shrunk in the Arctic to its lowest level since satellite measurements began 30 years ago. Fox News is being accused of censoring the actress Sally Field at last night's Emmy Awards. She ended her acceptance speech by saying, quote, "If mothers ruled the world, there wouldn't be goddamned wars in the first place." But that's not what viewers watching on Fox News heard. The network cut off Sally Field's mic mid-sentence.
And let's face it, if the mothers ruled the world, there would be no... Thank you so much. Thank you.
And the former president of Veterans for Peace, Dave Klein, has died. He was a founding leader of Vietnam veterans against the war. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Pinochet's coup in Chile, the massacre in Tiananmen Square, the collapse of the Soviet Union, September 11th, the war on Iraq, the Asian tsunami, and Hurricane Katrina. Award-winning investigative journalist Naomi Klein brings together all these world-changing events in her new book. It's called The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism. Economist Milton Friedman once said, quote, "Only a crisis produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around." Naomi Klein examines some of what she considers the most dangerous ideas, Friedmanite economics, and exposes how catastrophic events are both extremely profitable to corporations and have also allowed governments to push through what she calls disaster capitalism. Naomi Klein writes in the introduction to Shock Doctrine that, quote, "The history of the contemporary free market was written in shocks." She argues, quote, "Some of the most infamous human rights violations of the past 35 years, which have tended to be viewed as sadistic acts carried out by anti-democratic regimes, were in fact either committed with the deliberate intent of terrorizing the public or actively harnessed to prepare the ground for the introduction of radical free market reforms." I want to begin by playing excerpts from a short documentary co-written by Naomi Klein and Children of Men director Alfonso Cuarón. It's directed by Cuarón's son, Jonas. It's also called The Shock Doctrine. It premiered last week at film festivals in Venice and Toronto.
The 1940s have been a decade of breakthroughs and developments in medicine and psychiatry. Scientists have developed a new technology to cure mentally ill adults. With the use of electroshocks, the minds of sick patients are being wiped clean, giving them a fresh start. On this blank slate, physicians then imprint a new, healthy personality.
Remaking people, shocking them into obedience. This is a story about that powerful idea. In the 1950s, it caught the attention of the CIA. The agency funded a series of experiments. Out of them was produced a secret handbook on how to break down prisoners. The key was using shock to reduce adults to a childlike state.
The following are excerpts from the CIA's 1963 and 1983 handbooks.
It's a fundamental hypothesis of this handbook that these techniques are in essence methods of inducing regression of the personality. There is an interval, which may be extremely brief, of suspended animation, a kind of psychological shock or paralysis. Experienced interrogators recognize this effect when it appears and know that at this moment the source is far more open to suggestion, far likelier to comply than he was just before he experienced the shock.
But these techniques don't only work on individuals. They can work on whole societies. A collective trauma, a war, a coup, a natural disaster, a terrorist attack puts us all into a state of shock. And in the aftermath, like the prisoner in the interrogation chamber, we too become childlike, more inclined to follow leaders who claim to protect us. One person who understood this phenomenon early on was the most famous economist of our era, Milton Friedman. Friedman believed in a radical vision of society in which profit and the market drive every aspect of life, from schools to healthcare, even the army. He called for abolishing all trade protections, deregulating all prices, and eviscerating government services. These ideas have always been tremendously unpopular, and understandably so. They cause waves of unemployment, send prices soaring, and make life more precarious for millions. Unable to advance their agenda democratically, Friedman and his disciples